Howdy there, Isaac here. Today, it's finally time to catch up with the Amagakuri Genin known as Mirai, formerly Naruto Uzumaki. Last we left off, Fugaku Uchiha had become the 5th Hokage, and we haven't seen much from the Leaf besides that. In the Hidden Rain Village, Mirai and Team 12 were finally assigned onto a mission of significance, that being the assassination of a wealthy merchant. Let's see if this new Naruto has it in him to end a life. Without further ado, the story starts now. The Genin had been traveling for the better part of a day before finally entering the Land of Grass. Luckily, these lands were filled with several marshes and had abundant rainfall, therefore there was plenty of water around. The only problem the team had now was how they'd set up their ambush. Ugatsu had gone to track the merchants' movements, leaving Team Obito to their own devices. Mubi, being the strategist of the group, decided it'd be best to lie in wait in a nearby rice field, using the water to their advantage. But Mirai, not being super skilled in water jutsu, wanted to stay within the forest, stating he could make better use of his wind style there. This gave Mubi another idea, as he looked further down the road, seeing a small bridge that was just slightly beyond the forest.
Guys, why don't we do both? Obito and I can use the water to hide, while Mirai uses the trees for cover. Once the wagon is between the bridge and the edge of the forest, we strike. Mirai, you could use your wind swords to cut down the wagons in the back of the convoy, so they can't retreat, while Obito uses his water bullets to strike the nearby guards.
Mirai was immediately on board with this plan, while Obito was a little annoyed that he'd have to take point. The trio made a couple tweaks to the plan, but overall they were confident they'd win, and so they waited until midday, when the merchant was supposed to pass by. Within hours, Mirai spotted a convoy of 5 wagons, 2 of which were filled with various sets of jewelry, presumably what the merchant sold. But what really caught his eyes were the guards of the middle wagon. There, hidden within the guards, were 3 hidden waterfall ninja, though they looked like genin. Mirai frantically looked around for their Jonin sensei, but he couldn't see them. It was possible the Jonin was inside the middle wagon, but the better choice would be to stay outside, surveying the area for enemy ninja. Just as that thought floated through Mirai's head, he felt a kunai press up against his neck. "Tell me the location of your teammates, and I'll make your death painless," the Jonin said from behind Mirai. However, just as soon as he spoke, several shuriken found themselves embedded in his arm, the blood spraying onto Mirai, meaning this guy wasn't a clone. The Jinchuriki kicked his opponent away, before looking to see Ugatsu swing in and begin fighting the waterfall Jonin. So that's it, huh? Ugatsu used him as bait to lure out the Jonin. Not a plan Mirai liked, but it worked. Now, the Genin would have to hold up his end of the plan. Mirai launched himself out of the forest, using several wind swords aimed at the wagon wheels to halt them. This caused the guards to turn around, only to have water bullets launch into their backs. 2 of the enemy Genin managed to avoid this attack, with one getting hit in the leg. The Ame Genin had never fought another ninja in combat, and they were nervous, but they could see the others were as well, meaning this was likely their first mission too. The 6 Genin simply pulled out their weapons and stared at each other for a second, before Obito made the first move. The Ame ninja weaved several hand seals, creating 2 water clones of himself, while Mubi casted the sly mind genjutsu. But before the genjutsu fully took hold, the enemy Genin made their move, 2 of them running towards Obito, while the other threw Senbon at Mirai, staying behind to protect the merchant's wagon. As Obito was attacked, he used Earth Style to hide within the dirt, allowing his clones to fend off his opponents. While the Genin were preoccupied, he shot out of the earth and embedded a kunai into one of their necks, causing them to fall to the ground, still as a stone. Upon falling, the Genin's face covering was removed, revealing someone who was actually just as young as Obito. This caused him to stop his assault, facing the fact that he just ended someone his own age. However, his remaining opponent was livid and charged him with a kunai drawn. Luckily, Mubi was watching and was able to throw several shuriken into the enemy's back, just barely saving his comrade. While Obito was fighting those 2, Mirai used this time to charge the final waterfall Genin. The Jinchuriki started out by throwing several kunai at his opponent, who easily deflected the attack, but failed to spot the fact that 2 of the kunai had paper bombs on them. An explosion threw the genin into a nearby wagon, allowing Mirai to run up to the merchant's door. He opened the wagon doors, seeing the scared merchant within, only to have a kunai driven into his leg. The waterfall genin had recovered faster than Mirai thought, and was about to shove another kunai into his chest, but the Jinchuriki just barely avoided the attack, while weaving a couple hand seals, with the enemy genin pulling out several senbon. Mirai fired off several wind bullets, while his opponent threw lightning-enhanced senbon, which were shredded by the wind-style attack. Mirai watched as his opponent's life came to an end upon being hit by his technique, stunned at how quickly it happened. However, like Obito, the Uzumaki wasn't allowed to process this moment as the merchant ran out from his wagon. Mirai, remembering his promise to assassinate this merchant for his village, grabbed a kunai and threw it directly at the merchant's neck. His aim was true and the merchant dropped, much to the satisfaction of Obito and Mubi. With their mission complete, Mubi helped to patch up Mirai's leg while Obito went to help out Ugatsu. Funnily enough, he would arrive just as his sensei finished off the enemy Jonin with a lightning-enhanced sword. With there being enemy ninja involved, Ugatsu used this as an opportunity to show his genin how to seal away enemy bodies in order to get them back to the village for study. Overall, Ugatsu was proud of his team, though he would berate Mirai for allowing himself to be hit. With the mission being an overall success, the 4 made their way into a nearby city to rest for the night, something the Jonin leader felt his team deserved. Come morning, the genin squad made their way back to Amagakuri, where they turned in their mission reports and were compensated for slaying the merchant. But there was another genin team turning in an assassination mission, and that was Team Shiguri. Mirai would ask why so many genin teams were being sent on assassination missions, which caused Ugatsu to sigh. In truth, the Land of Rain has little shinobi, and due to that fact, we're even lower on Jonin and Chunin. That means you genin get trained for little amounts of time before being sent on missions fit for Chunin. Luckily for you, the Chunin exams are coming up soon. Wait, really? Are you saying we'll get to become Chunin soon? I can't wait. I'll train 10 times harder in order to pass, Mirai yelled out, forgetting he was in a small enclosed room. Huh, you a Chunin? We're the ones who are going to become Chunin here. Those exams are filled with enemy ninja just waiting to strike. They'd eat a kid like you alive, Shiguri taunted from across the room. This caused Mirai and Obito to start arguing with their older peer, but Ugatsu quickly shut that down. He stated that all 6 of them better become Chunin, or else he'd personally discipline them. Both groups were a bit angered at this, but they couldn't exactly argue with the Jonin, and they did want to help their village grow. The 2 groups went their separate ways, though Mirai and Shiguri did give each other dirty looks as they left. The genin trio were left to think about what happened on their first assassination mission. Sure, they knew one of them would be a killer, but not all 3 of them. This really did put into perspective how cruel the ninja world was. It could have easily been them that were offed, but due to teamwork and bad decisions on their enemy's part, they managed to prevail. The trio all knew they needed to become even stronger if they were to become Chunin, so they all promised to train their hardest until the exams took place. For the next 6 months, Team Obito trained hard between their C or even B ranked missions. The trio had gotten used to fighting enemy ninja and offing them, something that Mirai was actually getting proficient in. Their team began making a small name for themselves within Amagakuri, then being known as one of the best genin teams there, much to the chagrin of Team Shiguri. Overall, Obito, Mubi, and Mirai would become far more ruthless ninja during this time skip, readying themselves to dispatch any enemy they came across in the Chunin exams. Now, while Mirai was growing up in the Rain Village, several changes would occur within the Leaf. First of all was the Hyuga affair. This is the event that led to Hinata being kidnapped by Cloud Jonin and Hiashi offing him. Now, unlike with Hiruzen, once Fugaku was alerted of the Hyuga's heir being kidnapped, he'd immediately run out there himself. With the inclusion of the Uchiha clan in the recovery process, the Cloud Jonin would be found before Hiashi got to him. This Jonin would, of course, hold Hinata hostage, but once Fugaku got there, the jig was up. the 5th Hokage cast a powerful genjutsu on this Jonin, making him let Hinata go. Once she was safe, the Hyugas moved in and shut off his Tenketsu points, which allowed the Anbu to safely take him into custody. Not only would this help keep Neji's father alive, but it would allow Fugaku to gain some favor with the Hyuga clan. Once the Cloud Jonin was interrogated, Fugaku learned of their plan to kidnap Hinata and steal her eyes, something which he felt very strongly about since that was common for the Uchiha. This did seem bad on the surface, but it was actually fairly advantageous. Now Fugaku had proof of conspiracy to kidnap Hinata, and could use it to get war reparations from the Cloud Village. The Hokage made his move the next day, confronting Kumogakure about what happened, and this nearly caused a second war to break out. However, with Fugaku as Hokage, he'd make sure the Cloud Village knew he wasn't afraid to go to war and end their village. He mobilized the Anbu Black Ops, personally leading a group of Konoha's most elite shinobi right to the summit between the two groups. Yeah, Fugaku made sure everybody knew he was really about it, and this intimidation tactic was enough to force unruly A to sign a peace treaty, along with giving Konoha war reparations, something that definitely got the Uchiha some clout with the regular villagers. Now, with that said, things weren't all turning up Millhouse for the Hokage. Orochimaru had effectively disappeared off the face of the earth. Fugaku knew he had fled the Land of Fire, but had no idea where to. Speaking of missing ninja, Danzo was still at large, which was no joke. These two missing nin, a Sannin and someone who trained alongside the 3rd Hokage, were powerful, and Fugaku knew they'd make their appearance someday. From the intel his spies provided, Fugaku knew of some of the experiments these two were performing, including the reincarnation jutsu Orochimaru was already practicing. This gave the Uchiha an idea. If his enemies were using forbidden jutsu, then he should study it as well. Take a page out of the 3rd Hokage's book and learn everything he could about these S-rank jutsu. However, a second precaution Fugaku would take was the acquisition of bodyguards. While several Uchiha offered their services, namely Inabi Uchiha, who was a new clan head and who had been a staunch believer in Uchiha supremacy, Fugaku felt it was better to appoint guards from other clans. Combing over some of the most prominent shinobi within the village, the Hokage landed upon two very promising individuals who were also from the other 3 noble clans of Konoha. The first person he picked out was Hisashi Hyuga, Neji's father. This guy was a Hyuga who were praised for their abilities to sniff out enemy ninja with their dojutsu, and he had proven himself in the 3rd Great Shinobi War, much like Fugaku. Next up would be Dato Akimichi, who served alongside Minato in the war and was one of the most powerful Akimichi clan members. He'd be the perfect shield. And finally, there was Muto Aburame. Though he was pretty young, his skills were nearly on par with Itachi, though he'd be more of a secret bodyguard hiding within the shadows, more than walking around like Hisashi and Dato. With his guard set up, Fugaku felt far safer and began to make changes to Konoha and how it worked. First of all, he'd have to get rid of the beef between the Anbu and Konoha police force. The two clashed all the time due to the question of what investigations belonged to which organization. So Fugaku decided to do something he knew the Uchiha clan would hate. He dissolved the Konoha police force and established the Konoha Observation and Defense Agency, or KODA for short. This task force would have all the same powers as the police force and Anbu, but this time it was open to every clan, not just the Uchiha. As for the Anbu, well, they were repurposed for foreign defense, meaning they primarily monitored the borders and enemy nations, rather than operating within Konoha itself. Think of it how the FBI operate primarily within the United States, while the CIA operate outside of it. Occasionally collabing when outside threats make it into the country, if that makes sense. Either way, the villagers didn't have much problem with this change. Some of the shinobi actually approved of it, while the Uchiha, namely Inabi, disliked this change and vehemently fought against it. Inabi wanted to lead KODA, but Fugaku knew if that happened, he'd skew things in the Uchiha's favor, and this task force was meant to be an equal place for all. That said, the Hokage did make Inabi a captain within the organization due to the backlash from many of the younger, hot-headed Uchiha. Fugaku was doing his best to join all the clans together, but the Uchiha clan, specifically Inabi, was making it far harder than he thought possible. Now that he knew just how hard the third Hokage's job was, he'd have to buy that man a drink sometime. Now, while Fugaku was busy trying to keep peace within the clan, his two sons would have a very different upbringing. Well, sorta. Itachi would grow up just as he did normally, up until the time he was 12 or 13. This change happens when he becomes a Jonin, since his father, nor Danzo, are pushing him to become an Anbu member. Originally, Fugaku wanted Itachi in the Anbu in order to spy on Hiruzen, while the reverse was true for Danzo. But this time, Itachi is free to do what he wants, which is still join the Anbu. He does get some more time to relax, and there isn't nearly as much pressure, but he wants to do this in order to make himself stronger. Luckily, Shisui is around, making Itachi slow down whenever he isn't on missions. Speaking of Shisui, he'd become a prominent member within Koda, even being promoted to the Hokage's elite guard unit. And hey, he also gets to live this time, so we'll be seeing more of him soon. As for Sasuke, well, due to Itachi joining the Anbu and his father being busy running the village, he'd grow up pretty much the same way he did normally. He did have his mother around, which was a comfort, but what he really wanted was to hang out with Itachi or his father. Luckily, he would make some friends with the other children of Konoha, namely Neji Hyuga and Shikamaru Nara, due to him being less brooding and these two being a little more on his wavelength. Neji and Sasuke would form a sort of rivalry, both wishing to prove who was stronger due to their new upbringing. The Uchiha trained just as hard as he did in the anime, though this time it was to get his father's attention instead of getting revenge. While Neji trained hard in order to prove he was just as talented as Hinata, though he didn't hate her since his father was still alive here. Another rival Sasuke had was a fellow Uchiha named Taiko, who just so happened to be the son of Inabi. Now, when I say rival, I mean it in the worst way. Taiko was a rude and rather condescending child, often flaunting his Uchiha lineage over others. And while he wished this guy was all talk, that wasn't quite the case, as he had taijutsu skills on par with Neji and himself. Taiko was the real deal, and Sasuke hated his guts, especially since he occasionally made sly remarks about how Fugaku was betraying his clan for the village. Well, with that sorted out, Sasuke would eventually be put on Team 7, led by Kakashi Hatake. While I could see Fugaku appointing someone like Shisui, I don't think he'd have a problem with him. I mean, the guy is literally known worldwide as a master with the Sharingan, and his name strikes fear with an enemy ninja. Not to mention, the guy was an ex-Anbu captain and had several high-ranking missions under his belt, so there weren't any problems there. Apparently, Kakashi had also failed several students before, and being a man of high expectations himself, Fugaku thought this would be a perfect test for Sasuke. Sakura is added to the team as well, and here is where we get a crazy change. Now, while I could add another one of the Konoha 13 or 11 or how many there are, I think you real OG Naruto fans will appreciate me using this guy instead. So, do you remember the third episode when Naruto and Sasuke are waiting to be assigned to their Genin teams and, well, Naruto gets bumped by another student and ends up kissing Sasuke? Well, it took me nearly an hour to find his name, but the guy who bumps Naruto is named Tobio. And since he apparently has no spatial awareness, I'd say he's likely on the lower end of the totem pole for academy students. Thus, he'd be put on Sasuke's team. He seems to fit Naruto's archetype pretty well, so we'll say he's a knucklehead ninja like Naruto and Iruka before him. Now, due to Tobio's inclusion, I think the initial training would go just as it did in the original, meaning they pass Kakashi's test, if not a little faster since Tobio likely doesn't have as much chakra as Naruto did. Next up, the Land of Waves doesn't happen since Tobio quite likes the easy D-rank missions Kakashi had them running, so he wouldn't push for a C-ranked mission. However, while it doesn't happen for Team 7, it does happen for a different team, Taiko's team. About a week before the Chunin exam started, Taiko would come back from the Land of Waves with one less teammate and a shiny new pair of Sharingan. He'd of course brag about them, taunting Sasuke with his adventures abroad. This was enough for Sasuke to begin pushing his team for harder C rank missions, as well as asking Kakashi for training on how to get the Sharingan. Of course, Kakashi, thinking about how Obito got his, answered that the only way to get a Sharingan was to have a strong desire to protect your friends. This didn't help Sasuke much, but it did stick with him going into the Chunin exams. And so, with the Chunin exams arc beginning, Team Obito, Team Kakashi, and even Fugaku all prepared for what's to come. And prepare they should, as unbeknownst to them, there are several dark figures planning an elaborate crushing of Konoha. But that's where we're going to be leaving this part off for today. I know this part was a little Fugaku and Sasuke heavy, but I hope you guys enjoyed all of the political intrigue and whatnot. And if you guys did enjoy it, maybe use your hidden Mangekyo powers on that like button. Or possibly even win slice that subscribe button. You guys have a good day or night wherever you are. That's it for now. Bye bye.